When you have that transition from initially the beginning founding generations of religion into the greater tradition, eventually into world civilization tradition, something you have to expand to accommodate the entire spectrum of human personality. What does that mean? When Jesus' original followers, he probably attracted people with certain personality types. They were probably willing to give up wealth. They were probably willing to question conventional wisdom, right? The original followers of the Prophet Muhammad had certain personality types. So a religion in its early stages might, let's say, have a certain DNA, and it might attract certain people to that religion. And in that first generation or two or three, you might see, let's say, the behavior of that community is particularly honest or particularly generous. But by the time you get beyond those early generations, and especially as that community expands in size and space, eventually it's going to have to make room for the entirety of human personality. Because you don't have a religion that's followed everywhere from Spain to India, and everyone suddenly becomes an honest, generous person who's willing to pray 5 times a day and give up drinking wine. No, maybe they'll pray a couple times a day, maybe they won't drink as much wine as before, but there's going to be people who don't pray, people who drink alcohol, people who are dishonest. I would still contend that overall, there was still something in the DNA of Islam as an ideology that actually, contrary to popular opinion, this is not a religion spread by the sword. There was actually more of a kind of DNA urge towards toleration and accommodation of religious difference than towards violence or forced conversion to Islam. What's very interesting, especially when you're used to reading European history, where there's the 30 Years' War, there's the 7 Years' War, there's the 100 Years' War, there's all these different wars. In Islamic civilization, there's actually not that many wars, especially kind of the Islamicate heartland of the, say, Nile River to the Oxus River in Central Asia. There's not very many conflicts. It's not nearly as bloody as European history. So one of the myths, I think, about Islamic history is specifically, or it's particularly bloody. That's not true. I would say if you're going to look for a civilization that has a bit of a DNA for violence, I'm white, I can say this, I'd say Western European history. I mean, there was World War II, World War I, and we should put those out there as some evidence. Okay. But what about the original Muslim conquest of the Middle East? One of the things that people don't know generally is that, because nowadays when we think about the Middle East, we think, oh, it's all Muslims. I was so surprised. I remember when I was like in your position a year ago, and I was just learning about Islam. I was surprised to know there were Christians in the Middle East. I didn't know. Christians in the Middle East, really? And then someone said, yeah, you know, remember Jesus? That's where he lived. His followers still live there. But the fact of the matter is that for many, many centuries, Muslims, and particularly, this was especially in the early Islam period, it's identified with being Arab, Muslims were a tiny minority in this empire they just conquered. So when we go back to this big map, that huge, look at this massive amount of territory that's conquered by 750. That green blob indicates control, political control. It doesn't mean that everybody living in that blob is a Muslim. In fact, if you were going to go by population, you just have tiny little dots here and there. You have extremely small Muslim minorities that conquer these areas. Just to give you some examples, in the year 800 in Iraq, only 18% of the population was Muslim. The rest was Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian, varieties of Christianity, right? In Iran, in the 860s, it was only 40% Muslim. By the year 1000, however, you get up to 80% Muslim. Spain in 800 was only 8% Muslim. The Muslims arrived in Spain first in 711. But in the year 1000, it's 75% Muslims. You can see there's tremendous growth in the population, especially between in the 900s. Sorry. Egypt is not majority Muslim until the 11th century. In the year 1900, so this is almost 1,400 years after the beginning of Islam, you still have 14% of the population in that original green area, or let's say the Middle Eastern part. 14% is still Christian. And that's not even talking about other religious minorities. I think these are very interesting statistics. I really want to emphasize this. Muslims were an extreme minority in the areas they controlled for many centuries. They were not even up at 50% until some 200 years after the initial Muslim conquest of the West. So anyone who says that Islam is a religion that was spread by the sword, if you think that literally means people were forced to convert to Islam by the sword, they were not. If they were, it wouldn't have taken Muslims 300 years, 400 years to get to this percentage of Muslim population. We'll get more, I'll describe more of that. But let's look at these conversion rates compared to a situation where there was forced conversion. The Spanish Reconquista, in quotes, the conquest by especially the northern Spanish kingdoms of Aragon and Castile, beginning in the year 1085, Christians captured the city of Toledo, which had been ruled by Muslims, and then 1236 they captured the city of Cordoba, the capital of the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain, and then 1492 famously they captured the last independent Muslim kingdom in Spain, the Kingdom of Granada. And this is an image of what happens later, which is in 1609. All, not just Muslims, there were no Muslims at that point anymore. Anyone who was descended from Muslims had to leave Iberia. They were kicked out of Spain. People debate the numbers, but anywhere between 3 and 4% of the population of Spain was expelled, because they were descended from Muslims. In the year 1391, it's not just Muslims, obviously. In the year 1391, there were riots, anti-Jewish riots throughout Spain. 1/3 of the Jews in Spain were killed. 1/3 were killed. 1/3 were forcibly converted to Christianity. Of the remaining third, many of those eventually also converted to Christianity.